Davina stood at the balcony of a huge house, watching as more and more people walked inside. She had always believed the world was a magical land, and that life was one long party that never ended. Her parents appeared behind her, calling her name and jolting her out of her thoughts as they urged her to come see something. It was a gift. Her father and mother were very rich, and she had never once asked where all their wealth came from. She simply adored them because they pampered her and never refused her anything. She never truly knew who they were until it was too late. Unexpectedly, a fire broke out in the house, spreading quickly and leaving people with barely any time to escape. That evening, for the first time, she considered the possibility that her parents had enemies, or that they themselves were someone's enemies. In that instant, her parents became armed, standing alert with firearms, and her father ordered their nanny to get her out. Bremerton immediately grabbed the little girl in her arms and rushed through the burning flames. Though she managed to save Davina, her parents did not make it. The little girl cried uncontrollably, unable to believe they were gone. The nanny encouraged her to follow, telling her they could make her stronger even than her parents. Davina asked if she meant strong like her. The nanny explained that she was strong in order to protect the children under her care, and that she could teach Davina how to protect other children like herself. Though Davina did not fully understand what she meant, as she was still reeling from the loss of her parents and the loneliness that followed, she realized there was no need to despair. She had always trusted her nanny, and so she agreed to become her student. Davina spent the next 8 years in an Elite Nanny academy, the location of which was classified. Mrs. Bremerton had taken her under her wing, raised and trained her, and now she felt much stronger. After these years, the woman became the director of the Elite Nanny Academy, which pleased Davina. And now, after numerous lessons and training, the girl was ready to take on her first serious task. Shortly before her visit to the director, Bremerton had been discussing a generous offer with a certain Mr. Tony Angelini. The headmistress promised that with such a salary, they would be able to provide him with one of their top performers with over a decade of experience. But the man refused, saying he needed a special worker who had never worked with anyone before. Bremerton took out a list of employees who were in line for their first task and presented it to the client. Tony asked if all the people whose names were on the list were competent. The headmistress vouched that all their graduates were proficient in all the basic skills and had mastered the core pillars of the Elite Nanny program. They were all well-versed in early childhood development and psychology. It was also important for the employees to know how to provide first aid to victims. Self-defense was also taught so that the employees had the ability to protect the child when necessary. It was considered essential that all employees knew how to drive a car and other vehicles. Cybersecurity was also given great importance, so employees were trained in computer science. Bremerton also emphasized the importance of housekeeping, financial planning, politics, and more. The headmistress leans forward, asking why exactly he needs an elite nanny. Tony Angelini pauses, recalling a conversation from 2 weeks ago with a particularly nervous man. That man, barely holding himself together, had tried to get ahead of the situation, his voice shaking as he attempted to plead his case. But Tony doesn't have time for stammering and immediately cuts him off, making it clear that he already knows everything. The man, realizing there's no way to talk himself out of it, admits he made a mistake and scrambles to make promises, insisting he can fix things this time in Tony's favor. Tony, however, doesn't need empty words. All he wants is the ledgers. He's going to send over the bill and the man had better pay it. The hesitation is brief before frantic agreement follows, the fear in his eyes making it clear that refusal isn't an option. Before the conversation can continue, a voice suddenly shouts from beneath the table, demanding that milk be added. The unexpected interruption startles both men. Tony looks down just in time to see a small figure crawl out from under his chair, standing up as if he had been part of the meeting all along. Mikey, his son, brushes himself off before clarifying the request, making it known that the milk must specifically be chocolate because he absolutely loves chocolate milk. And apparently that is his most pressing matter at hand. The other man stares in utter disbelief, his fear momentarily replaced with confusion. He wants to know who this kid is, but before he can process it further, Mikey shifts into a fighting stance, arms crossed in defiance, declaring that, due to the oversight, a double portion is now required. Tony rubs his temples, exhaling heavily as he reminds his son about their agreement to stay quiet. Mikey, however, has his own set of conditions, and staying silent wasn't part of the deal unless his own demands were met. Just then, Jack stumbles into the room, hands trembling as he carefully presents a bottle of milk, uncertainty in his expression as he asks if it is still needed. Tony and Mikey respond at the exact same time, one dismissing the offer while the other insists that it is still very much required. Without another word, Tony lifts Mikey onto his shoulder, ignoring his continued protests about the milk situation as he turns to leave. Now, seated in the office of the Elite Nanny Academy, Tony keeps his explanation brief. His son's mother is no longer around, and he needs someone capable of looking after him. There's no need for elaborate justifications. The reality is simple. Before his son takes full control of every situation he walks into, someone needs to keep him in check. Bremerton assures him that his child is in good hands and asks if he wants to choose someone in particular, stating that all the candidates are excellent. Mr. Angelini looks through the folders but does not spend too much time on them. Soon he points to Davina's resume, something about it catching his interest. Pulling out the paper, he demands that this particular girl be assigned to raise his son. Bremerton explains that Davina specializes in cybersecurity and asks if he has an extensive internet network at home that requires monitoring. When he says no, she states that, in that case, she cannot recommend her for the job. She then suggests Aria, who speaks fluent Italian, and Heidi, who specializes in self-defense. But Mr. Angelini refuses to listen further and repeats that he wants Davina. Bremerton gives him a reproachful look but knows she cannot refuse because he pays well. She can only apologize to Davina in her thoughts. She calls Davina to her office, and soon the girl stands outside, mind resolute. She tells herself that this is her first assignment, and somewhere out there, a child needs protecting. She enters the office and sees Bremerton standing with her back to her, not turning around even after noting that Davina has arrived. With her back still turned, Bremerton notifies Davina that she has been offered an assignment today. Davina exhales in relief and immediately declares that she is completely ready, adding that she has been for a long time. But before she can say more, Bremerton interrupts, revealing that she was not the one who selected her for the task, as is usually done. Davina hesitates, confused, and asks why. Bremerton explains that the client personally chose her. Curious, Davina asks who it is. The headmistress retrieves a file from the table and hands it to her, explaining that the client's name is Mr. Tony Angelini. Upon hearing the name, Davina freezes. She knows it well. Too well. She remembers the front page headline, Mr. Angelini strikes again. The name is linked to the mafia, the very same one connected to the fire from years ago. A chill runs down her spine at the thought. Bremerton gently takes Davina's hand and advises her against taking the job. She states that she is obligated to inform her of the offer, but strongly urges her to refuse. Davina is stunned. Refuse her first assignment? After everything Bremerton has done for her? Memories of the past rush in all at once. She still does not understand why that tragedy happened, and until now she thought she would never get an answer. But suddenly she sees a chance. She recalls Bremerton's promise to make her stronger, and now she is strong. Without a second of hesitation, she declares that she is ready to accept the assignment and proceed immediately. The headmistress questions if she is doing it for the right reasons, doubting that it is worth pursuing because of her past. But Davina firmly explains that her past is the reason. Besides, Mr. Angelini has a small child. And a child, no matter who their father is, needs protection. She is ready to provide it. At the same time, she hopes to uncover the truth about that tragic day. The headmistress meets with Mr. Angelini once again. Wasting no time, he gets straight to the point, asking if she has signed the contract. Bremerton confirms that she has. That is all he needs to hear. Just then, Davina approaches, suitcase already packed and ready to go. Bremerton calls out her name before introducing her to her new employer. Standing in front of him, Davina takes a moment to study the man. The infamous Tony Angelini, the mafioso she has only read about. So this is him. But before she can say anything, he turns to Bremerton and asks if she even speaks. Instantly, Davina decides that she does not like him. What kind of question is that? Without hesitation, she extends her hand, formally introducing herself and stating that she looks forward to working for him. His response is brief and unenthusiastic. He simply says he is sure, then tells her to join them in the car when she is ready before walking off. Once he is gone, Bremerton takes a moment to review the duties with Davina one final time. She asks what her responsibilities are. Davina promptly recites them: protect and care for the charge, obey the primary client, anticipate the family's needs. Bremerton then reminds her of the most important rules. Do not reveal her secret. Do not embarrass the family. No shirking, no sabotage, and absolutely no romance. Davina acknowledges the instructions and promises to make her proud. The headmistress assures her that she already has. With confidence in her decision, Davina makes her way to the car. The driver, Adam, immediately steps forward and offers to load her suitcase into the trunk, an offer she appreciates. Since she seems like a decent girl, he decides to share a little advice. He warns her not to be intimidated. The child is only 4 years old after all. Davina simply replies that she is not afraid of anything. She opens the door and takes her seat in the car, composing herself quickly. To her mild surprise, Mr. Angelini is already inside with his son. Still, she maintains her professionalism and immediately acknowledges the boy, assuming that if he is Mr. Angelini's son, it is only proper to greet him. The child begins introducing himself as Michelle, but before he can finish, his father cuts in, explaining that everyone just calls him Mickey. Smiling, Davina expresses how pleased she is to meet him. Instead of responding politely, Mickey turns to his father and declares that he does not trust her. As if that were not enough, he casually adds that she smells like oranges. Davina blinks in confusion, subtly sniffing herself to check if it is true. Shaking off the comment, she shifts her attention to Mr. Angelini and asks where they are headed. Before he can answer, Mickey beats him to it, announcing that they are going to a large mansion in the City of Commoners. Tony sighs and corrects him, explaining that they have recently moved from Venice to Lyon. Davina notes that it is quite a relocation, leaving Italy for France. She pulls out her laptop, deciding to check a few things. Tony, noticing, informs her that there is Wi-Fi in the car if she needs it. She connects and immediately realizes there is no password. No password? It seems like a strange oversight for someone who just relocated for security reasons. Before she can think too much about it, she hears a click. Glancing at her door, she notices the lock button has been pressed down. Tony, without looking up, explains that they always drive with locked doors for safety. Not entirely convinced, Davina unlocks it again, explaining that in case of an accident, it is safer to keep the doors unlocked. But before she can even finish her point, Tony locks it again. Leaning in slightly, he clarifies that if someone tries to snatch his son at a stoplight, then it is not safe. Seeing his point, she lets it go and refocuses on her laptop. Meanwhile, Mickey, still deep in thought, suddenly asks his father if he has noticed the orange smell, clearly still preoccupied with it. Davina, half listening, cannot help but think about the contradiction. This man is lecturing her about security while his car's Wi-Fi is wide open. The boy shifted his attention to Davina's laptop, curiosity evident in his expression. He leaned slightly forward and asked what she was doing. Without answering, Davina pressed a button on the control panel beside her. A moment later, the partition window between them and the driver rolled down. Adam turned his head, immediately alert, asking the boss if he needed anything. Tony glanced at Davina before responding that it was nothing. Mickey observed the exchange with interest and remarked that she was quite cunning and skillful. Without acknowledging the comment, Davina pressed the button again and the partition smoothly closed. She then turned to Tony and pointed out that if he was so concerned with locking things down, he should start by putting a password on his Wi-Fi. Tony narrowed his eyes slightly at her, but after a moment he simply exhaled, recognizing she had a point, and muttered his agreement. The rest of the ride continued in silence. When they finally arrived at the Angelini family mansion in Lyon, Adam parked the car and immediately suggested that Davina go inside while he handled the luggage. As she stepped out, Davina instinctively assessed her surroundings and found it surprising that there were no guards, no visible security cameras, nothing to indicate that this was the residence of a man so preoccupied with security. Inside, Tony led the way and informed her that her room was on the second floor, second door from the left. Then, turning to his son, he added that from now on, if he needed anything, he should go to Davina and that there would be no more ride-alongs. Mickey's expression darkened as he protested, saying that he wanted to be with his father. Tony stated firmly that this was for the best. The boy didn't see it that way. To him, his father was deliberately shutting him out, treating him like a child, like he wasn't capable of handling responsibility. He insisted that his father needed him, but Tony remained silent, unwilling to say what was on his mind. Mickey's frustration boiled over. His grip tightened around the carton bottle of milk he had been holding, and in a burst of anger, he flung it onto the floor. The container burst open on impact, splattering milk across the polished surface. Without another word, he turned and bolted out of the house. Tony admitted that things had been difficult without Mickey's mother. Davina acknowledged that the boy had grown very attached to him, then asked if Mickey knew the truth about what Tony really did. Instead of answering immediately, Tony turned the question back to her, asking if she knew. Davina responded that she had read about his activities in the news, but hadn't looked too deeply into his affairs. Tony considered her answer for a moment before deciding to be honest with her. He revealed that he was actually the deputy of the Angelini Mafia Don. Davina understood that being second in command made him nearly as powerful as the Don himself. He further explained that he had more enemies than anyone else, and he was absolutely certain they would go to any length to get to his only son. Mickey was important, not just as his child, but as the heir to the Angelini name. That was why he needed Davina, to ensure his son's protection. She reassured him that she would do whatever was necessary to accomplish that. Hearing this, Tony was somewhat relieved, convinced that there would be no issue with the arrangement. Immediately, Davina began considering additional ways she could assist and started listing areas where she could be of use, mentioning cybersecurity, managing his private network, handling his schedule, and even overseeing his financial accounts. Tony cut her off, making it clear that none of that was necessary. Her only job was Mickey. She respectfully countered that keeping Mickey safe required more than just childcare. She pointed out the absence of bodyguards and the need to vet the household staff. Tony stepped closer to her, his voice firm as he repeated that her sole duty was to keep his son in sight at all times. At that moment, Davina's attention was drawn to the mess on the floor from the drink Mickey had thrown. Tony, noticing it as well, reminded her that the boy had run off and instructed her to go after him. Without hesitation, she turned and ran outside in search of the child, but he was nowhere to be seen. Then she heard shouting. Focusing on the sound, she caught sight of Mickey struggling against a group of men who were forcing him into the trunk of a van. Her heart pounded as she rushed toward them, but before she could reach them, the vehicle sped off. She stood frozen for a moment, staring at the van as it disappeared down the road. On her very first day, trouble had already found her. Turning back toward the house, she saw Tony standing in the doorway. A wave of dread washed over her as she realized she would have to tell him that his son had just been kidnapped. That moment, she cursed inwardly as she watched the car speed off, using the opportunity to take note of the license plate number. Without wasting a second, she rushed back to the house to report to Tony. He demanded to know what had happened, and she quickly explained that several masked kidnappers had taken Mickey. Before she could say more, he grabbed her arm and started pushing her toward the driveway, urging her to go after them. Davina yanked her arm free, telling him that was exactly what she was trying to do. She grabbed her suitcase and asked for the car keys, but Tony told her that Adam would drive. Just then, Adam came running toward them. As Davina climbed into the car, she turned to Tony and promised that she would definitely find his son. She then told him to report the kidnapping to the police for now, but before she could close the door, he leaned in and told her that wouldn't be necessary, if she did her job well. The next moment, the car was speeding in the direction the van had gone. Adam asked for directions and Davina quickly indicated when to turn left and when to turn right. She opened her laptop and activated a special program to search for vehicles. Having memorized the van's plate number, she began tracking it through surveillance cameras, making use of her expertise. Adam, glancing at the screen, asked what she was doing, and she briefly explained that she was locating the car through its license plate using the city's camera system. Within moments, she spotted the van on a traffic feed. It wasn't far from their location. Adam commented that this would make things easy, but she warned him that it could be a trap. She then directed him to take a left turn, followed by another right after 2 more traffic lights, explaining that this route would allow them to catch up with the van while avoiding unnecessary detours. As they approached, she hacked into the nearest phone network tower to scan for IMSI pings from active mobile devices in the building ahead. Adam, not fully grasping the technical details, stayed focused on driving as she worked. She detected 3 phone signals coming from inside the structure they were nearing. As soon as they arrived, they spotted the kidnapper's van parked outside. Without hesitation, she turned to Adam and instructed him to circle around the building and wait for her on the other side. She was going in to get the boy. On reaching the entrance, Davina spotted a bodyguard standing watch. He had the stance of a professional, but she found it odd that he wasn't carrying a firearm. As she approached, she warned him that she was well-trained and advised him to step aside and open the door peacefully. However, the man remained unmoved, standing even more comfortably in front of the entrance, clearly unfazed by her words. Without wasting another moment, Davina took action. She swiftly bent her arm and drove her elbow sharply into his stomach, making him gasp in pain. Without giving him a chance to recover, she followed up with a precise strike to his neck, sending him collapsing to the ground, unable to move. Stepping over him, she entered the building and found herself in what appeared to be a kitchen. The room was empty, but she quickly scanned for anything she could use as a weapon. Spotting a metal tray on one of the tables, she grabbed it without hesitation and armed herself. Moving forward cautiously, she soon noticed another door with a round window. Carefully peering through it, she saw that inside the room beyond, a man and a woman stood guarding Mickey, who was tied up. Without giving them time to react, Davina kicked the door open with a loud bang, bursting into the room, fully prepared for a fight. The kidnappers were just as quick to react, immediately assuming defensive stances, ready to engage. Wasting no time, she swung the metal tray with force, aiming straight for the man's head, but he managed to dodge at the last second, making her attack miss. He quickly retaliated with a strong punch, but Davina raised the tray, blocking the strike. A sharp jolt of pain shot through his fist from the impact, forcing him to momentarily step back. Seizing the opportunity, Davina attempted a powerful kick aimed at him, but before her foot could connect, the woman stepped in, blocking the attack and shifting the momentum of the fight. Without hesitation, Davina struck the kidnapper on the head with the metal tray. As both attackers stumbled, trying to recover from their injuries, she seized the moment, rushing to Mickey. Without even taking the time to untie him, she hoisted him onto her shoulder and sprinted out of the building. Moving swiftly, she headed straight for the waiting car where Adam was stationed. As soon as she reached the vehicle, he commented on her success while she quickly climbed in. Before anything else, she hugged the boy tightly, then immediately began untying him. Her voice was soft yet urgent as she asked if he was hurt or if he had been scared. Watching him sit, bent over in distress, a memory surfaced. She remembered sitting in the same position as a child, terrified by the fire that had consumed her home. Overcome with emotion, she embraced the boy once more, whispering that everything was fine now, that he was safe and had nothing to worry about. At that moment, a heavy sigh escaped Adam, as if preparing himself for a difficult task. Davina, perceptive as ever, instantly sensed something was wrong. Before she could react, she found herself staring down the barrel of a gun. Adam's expression had changed, his intentions now crystal clear. He ordered her to get out of the car and walk away, stating that if she complied, she would receive $2 million in return. Shocked but composed, Davina demanded to know if he had been working with the kidnappers all along. Adam denied any connection to the men who had taken Mickey, clarifying that they were nothing more than pawns, jerks that Tony had hired to test her. The realization hit Davina all at once. The entire kidnapping had been nothing more than a carefully staged trial. Adam further explained that Tony had never let his son out of his sight before today, making this the perfect opportunity to see if she was truly capable. Despite the revelation, Davina refused to back down. She positioned herself between Mickey and Adam, shielding the boy with her body. Her voice was steady as she declared that she would never allow Adam to go through with his plan. He, however, remained firm, insisting that she was smart enough to see the logic in his offer. Either she took the deal, or she got shot. Keeping her composure, Davina's eyes flickered to the laptop still open beside her. An idea formed in her mind. While continuing the conversation to hold Adam's attention, she subtly reached for the device, carefully feeling for the right button. She stated her refusal, unwavering in her stance. Adam's grip on the gun tightened as he prepared to pull the trigger. He responded coldly, making it clear there was no other way out. Without a second thought, Davina pressed the button. Immediately, the windshield wipers sprang to life, scraping against the glass with an unexpected, distracting noise. Adam instinctively turned his head, momentarily thrown off by the sudden movement. That was exactly what she had wanted. To distract him. Taking advantage of the moment, she swiftly turned to her laptop and pressed another button. Immediately, the partition glass between the back seat and the driver's seat shot up, slamming into Adam's hand and causing him to drop the gun. Without hesitation, Davina grabbed Mickey and pushed open the car door on her side. In the next instant, she rolled onto her back, ensuring that the boy landed on top of her unharmed. Quickly getting back on her feet with the child in her arms, she sprinted away before Adam could free himself from the trap. As she ran, she kept her voice calm and reassuring, telling Mickey that they would be home soon and that he had been very brave. Approaching the house, Davina's heart pounded as she noticed Adam's car already parked in the yard. A rush of terrible thoughts filled her mind. Then, her eyes landed on the driver standing beside Mr. Angelini, as if nothing unusual had happened. Before she could fully process what was going on, Mickey freed himself from her arms and ran straight to his father. Watching the scene unfold, Davina's gut told her that something was off. Tony, unfazed, patted his son on the head and turned to her with a satisfied expression. He praised her for doing a great job and announced that she had passed. The realization dawned on her. This had all been part of the test, including Adam's supposed betrayal. Adam, standing beside his boss, simply shrugged, saying he had only been doing his job. Mr. Angelini, however, was less impressed, pointing out that Adam had failed to complete the scenario properly since Davina had escaped before he could even pull the trigger. That, in his eyes, had undermined the test. Frustrated but keeping her composure, Davina retorted that, for situations like these, the car doors should never be locked while driving. Tony acknowledged her point, promising to take it into consideration. Mickey, still full of energy, chimed in with his own thoughts. He declared that Davina was good, noting that she was fast, scary, and, much to his surprise, had even hugged him. That comment made her realize that Tony had involved his own son in this so-called evaluation. Confronting him, she asked if he truly believed putting Mickey through such an ordeal was necessary. Tony countered with a question of his own. Would she have preferred that his son be caught off guard in a real situation and suffer psychological trauma because of it? She responded bluntly, telling him that he should never have doubted her abilities in the first place. Tony's expression didn't waver. He calmly stated that he had never doubted her skills, but he needed to be absolutely certain that she could neither be intimidated nor bribed. And, judging by what had transpired, he was pleased with the result. He went on to explain that previous babysitters had failed in similar tests, making this precaution necessary. Davina, still processing everything, assured him that she would keep an eye on Mickey, but asked that he at least trust her. His response was immediate. He could not, and he would not trust anyone or anything. When she pressed for a reason, his expression darkened. He told her that if she were to pull up police reports, she would find that his wife had disappeared a year ago. Then, from his pocket, he retrieved a small object and held it up. It was a wedding ring, unmistakably sized for a woman's finger, and it was covered in dried blood. With a chilling finality, he stated that there was one crucial detail the police had left out of their reports. His wife had not just disappeared. She had been murdered. Tony's face looked mournful as he closed his eyes, remembering his wife. Davina noticed the sadness in little Mickey's expression when his father mentioned his mother and decided it wasn't the right time to discuss it. She suggested they change the subject for the boy's sake, and Tony understood, instructing his son to go to his room, but Mickey objected, claiming he was fine and didn't want to return to the house. Davina glanced at the windows and asked where Mickey's room was. The boy frowned, not understanding why she needed to know. And when she jokingly suggested that it must be the one with lace curtains, he denied it. Tony explained that his son's room was on the back side of the house, and when Davina guessed it was the one with flower pots, Mickey angrily objected, saying his room had no flowers. She admitted she didn't know, prompting the boy to grab her hand and drag her along to show her his room himself. As they left, Tony called out for Davina to meet him in his study in 10 minutes. She followed Mickey while Tony watched them go, and Adam, who stood nearby, commented that he liked the new nanny and advised his boss not to scare her away. Tony replied that if Davina was easily frightened, she didn't belong there. The driver then approached, curiously asking if she really smelled like oranges. On the way to Mickey's room, the boy accused Davina of trying to trick him, but she clarified that she only wanted to see his room. She explained that a person's room could tell a lot about them, which surprised Mickey because no one had told him that before. Davina was worried that he had handled his kidnapping too well, but was also relieved that it didn't seem to affect him too much. When they reached the room, Mickey warned her that it was messy since they had recently moved, but she reassured him that it was fine. He mentioned that some of the things in his room were from their old house and clarified that they were children's items, but Davina simply said she liked such things. She told him he didn't have to show her if he didn't want to, but he shrugged and said it was just a room. Inside, Davina immediately noticed the mess, particularly the large number of empty chocolate milk cartons scattered around, making her think he had an out-of-control habit. She also noted that he had more suits than a pallbearer and saw a creative corner in the room, which she felt indicated underlying issues. She quickly came up with recommendations. He needed to consume less sugar, diversify his wardrobe, and have a dedicated art time. While she was lost in thought, Mickey hurried to hide some toys under his pillows, looking uncomfortable. He explained that he hadn't finished unpacking since they weren't staying long. Davina asked if that meant he hadn't been here long enough to pick up the empty milk cartons, and Mickey frowned, saying the maid didn't like him. Davina smiled and reassured him that no one could dislike him because he was wonderful. She stroked his hair, but Mickey immediately slapped her hand away and, looking up at her with a displeased expression, said that he didn't need a new mother. Davina understood that no one could replace his mother, but she was here to care for him. She told Mickey she could stop caring about him so much if he didn't like it, but he only replied in the same displeased tone that she should just do her job. She decided to play along, standing in a military posture as if accepting an order, but Mickey reminded her that it was time for her to meet his father. Realizing the time, Davina left for Tony's office, thinking about how stubborn the child was, but also understanding why. Standing in front of the door, she knocked cautiously. Tony invited her in, and Davina immediately noticed that he seemed different. He no longer looked as intimidating. She reported that she had left Mickey in his room and asked if that was all right. Tony confirmed that as long as Mickey was in the house, it was fine. He also admitted that he had put pressure on her earlier, but Davina disagreed, thinking it was the opposite. She assured him she would do her job thoroughly, and Tony replied, "By all means." She then asked if the person who murdered his wife was also a threat to Mickey. Tony confirmed that the threats began the moment his uncle, a mafia don, appointed Mickey as the syndicate's heir. Davina pointed out that the contract she signed didn't mention that his family was under threat, and that such obligations weren't included in the terms. Tony looked surprised, and Davina realized he hadn't read the fine print, deciding to use this as leverage. Tony questioned why it was a problem since she was trained in self-defense, but Davina objected, saying she had only recently graduated and that he should have hired a more experienced operator. Tony insisted that he had hired exactly who he needed. Davina didn't immediately understand what he meant and asked for clarification. For a moment, she even wondered if he knew about her past and had guessed she was here for answers. But Tony simply stated that he didn't need anyone else. He asked what conditions she had to stay, acknowledging that she now realized the job was much more dangerous than expected. He then began offering compensation options to keep her. He proposed increasing her payment, though Davina had planned to make her own demands first, and now it felt like she was playing into his hands. He continued offering incentives like a house in Majorca or political favors, but Davina found these meaningless if she didn't survive the assignment or conveniently disappear afterward. She also questioned why he was so determined to make her stay. Thinking that he might have more information, she decided on her demand. She wanted full and complete access. Tony asked for clarification, and she specified that to protect his son, she needed to be the closest person to both of them. Tony found this request interesting and asked if she thought he would be impressed with her selfless work ethic, but Davina stated that she only wanted to survive the assignment and would use every possible means to do so. Tony considered it carefully, knowing there were some things he couldn't give her access to, such as business accounts or customer data. She reassured him that she wasn't interested in his business and promised not to look at anything she didn't need, which was actually a lie. The conversation became amusing to Tony, and he asked what she was trying to achieve. She didn't fully understand, so he repeated the question, wanting to know what she personally gained from all this. After quickly considering her options, Davina stated that she had a personal request. Taking a deep breath, she asked Tony to leave her a guaranteed excellent review. Since she was putting her life on the line for Mickey, she wanted full marks when the one-year contract ended. She also requested that Tony become the highest patron for the Elite Nanny Academy. Tony repeated her words, noting that her demands were surprisingly small. She confirmed her request, and he promised to fulfill it in a year when it was time for her to leave Chicago. However, Tony then gave her a threatening look and warned that if anything happened to his son, the situation would be completely different. If Mickey was harmed, Davina would regret not dying during her mission. Davina's heart pounded with fear at his threatening words. Yet, despite his menacing tone, he still told her to make herself at home. As she left the office, she realized he was completely serious. She could see it in his eyes. She knew that a man like him would not hesitate to kill her slowly if she made a mistake. But at the same time, she was confident. Elite Nanny never fails. As she stepped into the hallway, she encountered a driver dragging her suitcases toward her room. She offered to handle them herself, but Adam responded that she had already faced enough challenges for the day. He also mentioned that she was staying, adding that she had done a nice job. He explained that he would take her luggage to the second floor and suggested she explore the house, reminding her that it would be her home for the next year, unless something went horribly wrong. Davina studied Adam, unable to determine whose side he was on. Was he for her or against her? Regardless, she took his advice and wandered through the house, taking in its grandeur. It was lavish, almost like a small palace. Eventually, she decided to step outside for a walk in the garden. Not far from the door, she spotted a security guard she already recognized, the same one she had recently knocked down while saving Mickey. When she reached the fence, she noted that it was 10 feet high and topped with barbed wire. In addition, several more guards, just as massive as the first, were stationed at various points. As she walked further, she saw extravagant fountains, which didn't seem like an ideal playground for a young boy. It occurred to her that taking Mickey to a park might be a better idea. Back inside, Davina went in search of her room. She found it to be quite spacious, though luxury was the least of her concerns. She took the opportunity to charge her laptop, but when she opened her briefcase, a wave of horror washed over her. The laptop was missing. Frantically, she retraced her steps, trying to recall where she had last seen it. Then it hit her. She had left it in the car when she jumped out with Mickey. She rushed to the window, hoping to retrieve it right away, but the car was nowhere in sight. Just then, Tony walked into her room and invited her to dinner, which was already prepared. Seizing the opportunity, she immediately asked how she could get her laptop back. Tony assured her that Adam would take care of it. She then asked if she should bring Mickey down, but Tony dismissed the idea, saying that Mickey had chosen to dine in his room that evening. Curious, she inquired whether Mickey often skipped dinner. Tony admitted that his son had been doing so frequently. Davina pointed out that Mickey had experienced many recent changes, particularly the loss of his mother. At that, Tony's demeanor darkened. He spun around, his voice sharp, and told her that he didn't need her opinions about his son's feelings. He knew his son well enough. He repeated that her only concern should be Mickey's safety. Unknown to them, Mickey stood outside the door, trying to eavesdrop on their conversation. Davina, however, heard a faint rustling outside the boys' room. Tony, preoccupied and eager to leave, paid no attention, but Davina realized that Mickey had heard everything. It saddened her. He was still so young. She made her way to the dining room where she was invited to sit at a massive table. When she saw the amount of food before her, she thought it was excessive, even though she was hungry. Across from her, Tony Angelini sat, ready to begin his meal, his eyes fixed on her. Though she had been trained in etiquette, she still felt slightly uncomfortable. At the academy, she had been taught the art of small talk with employers, so she decided to engage in conversation. She asked what had brought him to Chicago. His answer, business, seemed odd to her. He wasn't from the local mafia, and she knew the crime families here wouldn't welcome an outsider. She suggested that a man in his position could stir up trouble in the city. He agreed, his tone calm, as if he had no remorse for the risks he was exposing his son to. Determined to keep the conversation going, Davina asked about his plans for Mickey in the coming year. Tony hesitated, as though considering her question carefully. She elaborated, suggesting she could teach Mickey a language or an art. After a moment, he responded that he would think about it. After all, as the future heir of the Angelini family, Mickey had expectations to meet. Just then, the dining room door opened and a maid entered, bringing a drink to the table. The timing struck Davina as odd, almost suspicious. She concluded that everything about this house was strange. The staff moved like ghosts. She had seen them, but aside from Adam, she had hardly met anyone. It also struck her as strange that she was the only one invited to dinner with Tony. Perhaps it was just a formal gesture for her first day, she reasoned, and decided to play along. She then asked what Mickey normally did during the day. Tony replied that he usually took the boy to work with him. Davina was taken aback and firmly stated that this would no longer happen. She immediately noticed the shift in Tony's demeanor. He stiffened, his expression hardening. Without a word, he ordered the maid, Julia, to leave them. Davina sensed that something significant was about to unfold. Tony then stood up and asked her to follow him. She wanted to protest, but he cut her off, instructing her not to say another word. A guard stood outside the door as usual. Tony gestured for him to act, and as Davina passed the massive man, she braced herself, fearing he had been ordered to harm her. But the guard remained still. Instead, Tony grabbed her arm and pulled her in another direction. A part of her was relieved that he hadn't reprimanded her in front of others, but another part felt he was taking things too far. When they finally stopped, she immediately began to apologize for speaking out of turn. But to her surprise, Tony interrupted, telling her not to apologize. He actually agreed with her. Then, to her confusion, he instructed her to look scared. She didn't understand why. But before she could question him, he suddenly grabbed both of her arms, making her flinch. He repeated that she needed to be afraid. Then he addressed her earlier question about his goals for Mickey. He had only one. He was about to reveal it when a rustling noise interrupted them. A guard appeared, informing Tony that there was a problem in the 3rd District. Realizing the situation was serious, Tony told Davina they would talk later and left on urgent business. Alone, she tried to piece together what he had been about to say. What was his goal for Mickey? And why was he so afraid of anyone overhearing it? The next morning, Davina heard Mickey interrogating someone in a menacing tone, accusing them of thinking he wouldn't notice they had been stealing from the Angelini family. Curious, she opened the door to Mickey's room and saw the boy interrogating the duckling in the dim light. It struck her as strange that a boy his age was learning to interrogate others, but she chose not to dwell on it. Instead, she called out to him and invited him to join her for breakfast. However, Mickey declined, saying he was busy and would eat in his room. Davina smiled and remarked that he had also eaten dinner in his room last night. She then teasingly asked if he was afraid to eat human food in front of her. Mickey didn't quite understand what she meant by human food, but wondered about it. Deciding to play along, Davina promised that she wouldn't tell anyone his secret. Confused, Mickey asked what secret she was referring to. She explained that she wouldn't tell anyone he was actually a vampire, justifying her claim by pointing out that he never went anywhere and only ate when no one could see his fangs. Mickey quickly objected, explaining that he was not a vampire. He simply didn't want to eat with her. In response, Davina admitted that she had already eaten, so the kitchen was entirely at his disposal. She then left him alone, inviting him to meet her downstairs later. After she left, Mickey remained dissatisfied, not understanding why she wouldn't just give up. He then noticed the duckling staring at him and ordered it to stop looking at him that way. Later, after breakfast, Davina washed the dishes and was pleased that Mickey had finally eaten outside his room. On one of the plates, she noticed he had drawn a vampire's face with fangs using sauce. She found it a little cheeky, but was ultimately just glad the child had eaten. As she finished cleaning, she heard someone enter the kitchen. Turning around, she saw a woman in an apron and realized it was Signora Conte. Davina introduced herself. The woman immediately asked what the nanny was doing in her kitchen. Davina explained that she would now be overseeing Mickey's breakfasts and lunches, but assured her she wouldn't be a bother. Signora Conte noted that the new employee cleaned up well. Then, reaching for a cabinet and nearly pushing Davina aside, she explained that Mr. Angelini wanted coffee. As she went about her task, she asked Davina if she had any problems with her room and if she had slept well. Davina replied that the room was lovely and lied that everything was fine. In reality, she hadn't slept at all, as she couldn't shake the feeling that she was constantly being watched. Davina then asked the maid if she had seen her laptop, which she really needed. The maid, unimpressed with modern technology, responded that books were far better. At that moment, the boss's voice rang from the doorway, demanding his coffee. Davina turned and noticed how calm Mr. Angelini appeared now, though she was certain he was just pretending that nothing had happened the previous night. Tony noticed her curious expression and assumed she had a problem. She said nothing about it, only asking if little Mickey was okay. At the same time, she struggled to understand her boss, as he had seemed eager to talk about his son the night before. Approaching Mickey's room again, she heard him speaking menacingly to the duckling and could only guess where he had learned such behavior. Deciding to use her free time to investigate her missing laptop, she returned to her room and found it lying on a small table. Eager to do some digging, she immediately opened a search engine and typed Angelini crimes in Venice. Soon, she was reading about the family's long-standing mafia ties, spanning over 100 years. Tony's uncle was the current Don, having taken over after his older brother's death. However, since the uncle had no sons, his nephew, Tony, had become his deputy, and Mickey was the heir. Now Davina understood why the child was so serious and behaved the way he did. Wanting more information, she delved into the dark web and discovered that, despite his short time in the area, Tony had already made enemies. She couldn't comprehend why he was willingly getting involved in such dangerous affairs. Then, a thought struck her. Perhaps Mr. Angelini had run out of business opportunities in Italy. Just then, she heard Mickey calling her, referring to her as Crazy Lady. Instead of getting angry, she simply closed the laptop and went to see what he needed. Entering his room, she saw that the duckling was already packed in a bag, while Mickey was searching for something. The boy explained that he couldn't find his favorite tie, and that he was going to a night event with his father. Davina quickly realized that Mickey hadn't been informed that his father wasn't planning to take him along. She hesitated, wondering how to break the news. Gently, she suggested that he stay home while Mr. Angelini attended the event. But Mickey was certain his father needed his help, especially since he was meeting with the Croatian Syndicate, a group that controlled major smuggling routes in France and had a deep hatred for the Angelini family. This was new information to Davina, and she was surprised that the boy knew such details. Mickey insisted that when he was around, his father was underestimated, which worked to their advantage. He then pleaded with Davina to support him when his father arrived, hoping she would convince him to take him along. At that moment, Tony entered and told his son to stay with Davina. He would return the next evening and believed it was safer for Mickey to remain at home. Mickey was visibly upset and tried to remind his father of what his uncle wanted, but Tony didn't budge. He insisted that Mickey stay in the house, as it would bring him peace of mind. Before leaving, Mr. Angelini turned to Davina and asked her to keep a close eye on his son. Seeing an opportunity, she asked him to wait, wanting to say something. He paused, thinking it might be important. Mickey watched attentively, hoping Davina would plead for him to go along. But instead, she only asked for access to the security system again. At that moment, the boy felt utterly betrayed. His last hope had shattered. Tony, unable to handle it now, promised to discuss it with Davina when he returned. With that, he closed the door behind him, leaving his son with the nanny. Mickey stood frozen, his expression unreadable. Attempting to lighten the mood, Davina smiled and mentioned that it would be just the two of them for dinner. But Mickey refused to eat and asked her to leave. Davina wanted to say something else, but Mickey suddenly shouted at the top of his voice for her to go away. She tried to persuade him, promising they would have fun together, but he saw nothing fun in it. To him, his father had simply decided to abandon him. Left with no choice, Davina exited the room and Mickey slammed the door behind her. She understood his feelings all too well, having been in a similar situation herself. Memories of her burning home resurfaced. There was nothing fun about being left behind. That night, Davina could not sleep again. She was once more overcome by the unsettling feeling of being watched. She searched the entire room for cameras but found nothing, yet the sensation did not fade. Despite this, it was time for her to get ready to resume her duties. As she gazed around her perfect room, a nagging suspicion crept in. She was certain there was something terrible behind it all. Noticing the rising sun, Davina decided to step out onto the balcony to admire the view. She inhaled deeply, savoring the fresh morning air. After standing there for a few minutes, she turned back inside, walked to her laptop, and used voice search to look up local parks in Lyon, France. After finishing her search, she went to Mickey's room and found him comfortably lying on his bed. Davina offered to take him to the park after breakfast. Mickey, however, refused, saying he wasn't going to eat her disgusting food and had no interest in going anywhere. But then, suddenly, his curiosity was piqued. He asked which park she had in mind. Davina mentioned a small playground nearby and also told him about a zoo in another part of town. Mickey dismissed both options, claiming the playground was too small and the zoo smelled bad. At that point, he admitted that he really liked Place Bellecour. Davina, unfamiliar with the location, asked if it was between the rivers, commenting that it sounded too far. Mickey described the area, explaining that it had many trees, benches, and 2 large fountains. He then looked pitiful and mentioned that he used to go there with his dad to watch the ducks. Already somewhat familiar with her employer's nature, Davina tried to imagine the scene. Still, she agreed to take Mickey there, on the condition that they have breakfast together. At Place Bellecour, Davina watched as Mickey fed breadcrumbs to the ducks. He even spoke to them, asking them not to fight since he had enough for everyone. Despite his efforts, the birds continued to squabble. Observing Mickey, Davina realized just how much the boy missed his father, who hadn't even been gone a full day. Soon, Mickey grew tired of feeding the ducks, who, true to their nature, did not stop fighting, and threw the rest of the bread into the fountain. He then turned to Davina and asked her to buy him ice cream. Davina checked the time and hesitated, not wanting him to spoil his appetite before dinner. Mickey, however, pleaded, even adding the word, please, and reminded her that his dad always bought him ice cream. At that moment, he looked so adorable that Davina couldn't refuse but limited him to just 1 scoop. She pointed toward a nearby ice cream tent, but Mickey objected. He explained that his father always took him to the old quarter for ice cream where they sold his favorite, pistachio with chocolate chips. Since he was so eager, Davina agreed, and they headed there. The area was crowded, filled with tourists. As they approached the vendor, Davina ordered Mickey's ice cream in French. From the seller's reaction, she realized that she still needed to work on her pronunciation. Within moments, the ice cream cone was ready. Davina pulled out her phone to pay, while Mickey eagerly watched the treat, ready to take his first bite. But then, all of a sudden, he came to his senses and bolted, as if a gang of bandits were chasing him. Davina barely had time to register what had happened before he disappeared into the crowd. She immediately hurried after him, determined to catch up, but he had already rounded a corner. At first, she couldn't understand why Mickey would run away from the very ice cream he had begged for. Then, as realization dawned, she called his name, already suspecting where he was heading. Meanwhile, Mr. Angelini was on his way to an important meeting, using the time on the road to think. His driver, Adam, interrupted him to inform him of an incoming video call. When Tony asked who was calling, Adam replied that it was his uncle. Tony wasn't in the mood for a conversation, but asked Adam to find out what he wanted. The driver didn't know but advised him not to keep his uncle waiting. Tony reluctantly agreed and instructed Adam to connect the call. Opening the laptop in the car's salon, Tony pressed a button, and his uncle's face appeared on the screen. The older man's voice carried a hint of concern, making Tony briefly wonder if something serious had happened. However, his uncle merely asked how things were progressing. Tony replied that Clermont-Ferrand and Nevers were settled and that Dijon was the last on his list. His uncle listened, then inquired about the Croatians, asking if Tony thought they would cooperate. Tony confidently responded that they would be fools not to. His uncle reminded him that he had sent him there to establish a foothold, not to start a turf war. He knew Tony's character well and wanted to make sure he stayed focused. The Mexicans were experienced in weapons, but lacked expertise in luxury goods, something that could work to their advantage. Their connections with loggers and Chinese retail chains would also play a crucial role. Pleased with the progress, Tony's uncle remarked that soon they would leave their mark on the city. The Normans were eagerly awaiting Tony to pave the way, and he assured his uncle that he would handle everything properly. His uncle then reminded him that the future empire would one day belong to his son, urging Tony never to forget why they were doing all of this. Tony reassured him that he understood. Before ending the call, Uncle Johnny asked Tony to inform him when everything was set. He then inquired about Mickey. Tony briefly updated him, prompting his uncle to make a toast to their little mafioso. After the conversation, a blood-stained employee entered the room, informing Tony that everything was ready. This was good news. As he prepared to go, he wondered what the man would tell him this time, though he already expected the usual predictable lies. Listening to them had become boring and tiresome. While the mafiosos conducted their business, little Mickey was committing his own mischief. After escaping from Davina, he was determined to find a way to reach his father. He ran for quite a while, becoming slightly out of breath, but he didn't give up. Eventually, he reached a bus stop and approached the first bus he saw. The driver informed him that the bus was heading to the station, and Mickey eagerly said that was where he needed to go. After paying the fare, he found himself a comfortable seat and settled in. As he looked out the window, he noticed Davina running down the street, searching for him. He quickly ducked, making sure not to be seen. Right now, his only concern was getting to his father as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Davina saw the situation more as a game of hide-and-seek, confident in her ability to track him down. Enjoying this recap so far? Comment Davina below for part 2. Until next time, ciao!